good evening. It's great to see so many of you here still. Amazing, actually, because we've just been resuming energy or collecting energy or really getting in the mood to conduct this round table together on transforming Kafka with the artists that are involved in the project. We're going to take about an hour, not more than that. I'll do brief introductions. Then everyone gets a moment to tell us a little bit about their work for the project. And then we open conversation among us in the first instance, and then, of course, also opening to you. And so this is what's going to happen. I start with introducing Tessa Farmer. Thanks for being here, Tessa. Tessa is a London-based artist. You will have seen that amazing, various sculptures in the exhibition, but that main sculpture in the Kafka exhibition at the Bodleian Library. Tessa's work has been exhibited worldwide and is in many public and private collections. We decided to skip all the names of the galleries. It's too long, really. But what is, I think, important and interesting, that Tessa has been in 2007, you were an artist in residence at the Natural History Museum in London. And you were nominated for the Times South Bank Show Breakthrough Award. But since then, you continue to work with entomologists of the Natural History Museum because you have this long, long story with insects. So we need to come back to that here. And I now must read a very brief paragraph that you write on your own work because it's so wonderful. Tessa says, constructed from insect carcasses, taxidermy, bones, plant roots, and many other found natural materials, her work comprises complex installations and animations depicting Boschian battles between animals and tiny winged skeletal humanoids. The work mimics the natural world, revealing the ever-fascinating, often violent, unseen worlds that lie beneath our feet. So, very promising. Thank you for being here. Next is Pita. Arthur, wonderful that you're here again. We had numerous interactions in Oxford over the past 2 years. Arthur Pita is an award-winning choreographer and director, also based in London, and working a lot internationally too. Just naming a few select works, they include A Streetcar Named Desire for Decadances, Good Vibrations with the Euston Ballet, A Dream Within a Midsummer Night's Dream for Ballet Black, a Björk Ballet, amazingly, with San Francisco Ballet, you name it. And, it goes on, the list goes on of amazing international productions. Very important for us here is, of course, the landmark piece on the Metamorphosis for Linbury Covent Garden and the Joyce Theatre in New York, which has had also this fantastic renaissance during the pandemic when it was put online on the site of the Royal Ballet. Many people watched it, started to relate to to Gregor's confinement in a new way. It was the piece to be on there, online and available during that time. The production that, of course, we also talked about this afternoon with Minded Peters and myself, that you've done for the project here is A Hunger Artist. That was shown in June at the new fire station, premiered on the 3rd of June. Again, involved the team from the Metamorphosis, Edward Watson, former principal from the Royal Ballet, Meow Meow, amazing Australian singer, and Frank Moon, composer. So we'll hear more about that, but also about other things, I'm sure. Thanks for being here. Wonderful to see you again. Then we have Anna Kelly. It's great to meet you. Only met today, the two of us. Anna Kelly studied French and German literature at Wadham and is now publishing director at Abacus and Virago, both imprints of Little Brown. Anna publishes literary fiction and non-fiction, including books in translation. In 2024, she published A Cage Went in, there it is, Cage Went in Search of a Bird, for the project, an anthology of Kafkaesque short stories with contributions from best-selling prize-winning authors, including Tommy Orange, Ali Smith, Naomi Alderman, and Charlie Kaufman. Thanks for being with us tonight, Anna. And then we have Ed Harris. Wonderful, you're here too, Ed. Long-standing cooperator of the Kafka Network in Oxford. Ed, too, is an award-winning playwright, poet, and comedy writer. His first major play, Mongrel Island, opened at Soho Theatre in 2011 to great critical acclaim and was later produced in Mexico. Other plays include the Cow play, Never Ever After, shortlisted for the Maya Whitworth Award, and What the Thunder Said, which won the Writers' Guild Award for Best Play for Young Audiences. You've also done an opera, I've learned today from your bio. Amazing, A Shoe Full of Stars, also won an award. Most importantly today is, of course, that Ed is one of BBC radio drama's most regularly commissioned and highly acclaimed dramatists, with over 20 audio plays broadcast on Radio 3 and 4. And this year, Ed is the lead writer for BBC Radio 4's Kafkaesque season, with adaptations of The Trial and The Man Who Disappeared, and a new play, Franz and Felice, that I have just started listening to and enjoy immensely, which has been put forward now for the award. There we are. Thank you so much for being here. So, and what I go to our first slide, that's Tessa. So what we decided to do, to have little, give you a little space, little statements, a statement, whatever. Tell us a little bit about your work. We have the slide in the background, and we start with Tessa, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's an honour to be part of the exhibition at the Western Library. Difficult to describe my piece. It's in a large vitrine with lots of entomology books, and started off as a response to the Metamorphosis, but I got a bit carried away, which I have a tendency of doing, and it kind of includes references to Report to an Academy, The Burrow, Odradek, and I think a bit of crossbreed going on in there. But the kind of starting point, after discussions with Barry Murnane, was books, and you mentioned a quote about Kafka, how literature was his habitat. Yeah, and I've always been kind of interested and obsessed with insects, and was thinking, okay, insects that eat books. And I've got a long running interest in pests, and the pests that are persecuted, and the destruction and the disorder that they cause, and kind of started from there. So there's this book tower that's sort of transforming, and there's these worm-like structures going through it that are cross-pollinating the images and the literature. So it's old entomology books and a collection of Kafka stories, and then things are spewing out of the top, but then they're swarming with real insects throughout the large vitrine, and kind of engaging with the other books in there. And then it gets a bit it's quite complex. You kind of have to see it really, because the image on the left is a reference to Report to an Academy. It's a The detail is parasitic skeleton fairies laying eggs in cockroaches, which are attached to a chimpanzee skull, which is meant to be red Pita. See, I got a bit carried away, and yeah, you kind of have to see it.
Yeah, it's in the Bodleian.
Yeah, it's in the Western Library in the Bodleian.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this opening, Tessa. We thought we go around and collect and then build, so we have nice ground for more conversation. I think next on the slides, let's go with the order is actually Ed. And we also have a clip, but you say when you want to play that clip and how you want to do it.
Emma, and we can. So I'm Ed Harris. I'm a playwright and comedy writer, and as you know, and I've always been somewhat friendly with Franz Kafka. I've been rather obsessed with him since I was about sort of 15 or something, and found a copy of Metamorphosis in my brother's room while he was probably off somewhere at school, for example. And I just fell in love with it. And there was, first of all, I'm a dyslexic kid, and there was something, I was just beginning to realize that literature did something that nothing else that I'd encountered did. And it was sort of as simple as that. So I was still ferreting around, and I knew by now that I was quite into my brother's taste because I tried various books off his shelves. And then there was something just about Kafka and the word of it, the brutalist style, the K's that I just, and fell in love with Metamorphosis. There was a little inscription on the first page, which was from a friend of my brother Joe's, giving it to Joe on his birthday, but the friend had written as if it was from Franz Kafka and said, "Dear Joe, happy birthday. You're right. A cockroach was much better than a giant kangaroo. Lots of love, Franz." And so my introduction, I think, to Kafka was a humorous one, and that sort of stayed with me in everything that I've done. And this year, I've been very, very lucky to struggle with his work again in the form of these two adaptations for radio, and also a sort of biopic or bio-owl, or whatever that would be if it's aural. But shall I just wind up there and go, hit it, Emma?
Is he going to heal, maybe?
Oh yeah, I'll give context. Sorry, I'm not very good at that. So, of the various Kafka things that I did this year for Radio 4, there's a two-part, catch them all, there's the trial, that's very good. There's The Man Who Disappeared in two parts, that's also very good. And the biopic thing, which is Franz and Felice, which is very good. And what you're about to hear is the very first bit of The Man Who Disappeared, also known as America, for those who have that edition.
All New York glares back at Carl through the unblinking eyes of its skyscrapers. To and fro, big ships cross one another like cutouts on cardboard waves. And hundreds of packed boats ferry passengers face first through the spindrift. And above it all, above Carl and the boats and the city and the squall, in a sudden glare, wow. The goddess of liberty, her sword arm outstretched, the blade dazzling in the sun. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking torch, not sword. There's a mistake. There's no mistakes here. This is America with a hard K. So, the blade dazzling in the sun.
New York.
Carl takes his first step into the land of freedom, of fraternity, of unity, and with his suitcase by his side.
Hey, my suitcase!
And it's been stolen. Did anyone see the guy? Doesn't matter. Carl, 17 years of age, our hero, incidentally, gives chase.
Please! That's all I own!
Picture the scene from the suitcase's point of view. Paltry possessions rattle inside as we duck and dive between the knees of dockers, past sweeping dresses, wooden crates. Advertisements the length and breadth of warehouses stare down. Henry Ford Motors, Edward Jacobs Cargo and Parts Distribution. And the suitcase's owner,
Someone stop him!
Carl Rossman, behind, wending between hulking American wharf workers, mustachioed gents balancing pince-nez, ladies in hats the size of parasols, until the thief trips and the suitcase spins, and it comes to a slow stop. Aha! By the bamboo cane of all people, a real-life American senator. Yes, sir.
Please, sir. That's my suitcase.
Sir, he's a goddamn liar.
Anna, it's your turn.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Anna, and this is the book I published this year, A Cage Went in Search of a Bird. So this was an attempt to see what would happen if you try to produce some new fiction, all of which is inspired by Kafka. So I've noticed over the years that so many authors, when they're talking about their influences or about the writers that mean the most to them, it is amazing how many times Kafka comes up, and interestingly in all different types of writers, which I think is fascinating. So this was such an interesting opportunity and gave me the chance to go to lots of different writers and say, so would you like to write a Kafkaesque short story? Obviously that term Kafkaesque, huge and sort of elastic, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But that was so much fun to be able to go to writers and say, would you like to do this? And I think one of the joys of doing this book was just how quickly some of the writers responded, as though, it had almost been there waiting in their unconscious, but unsurprisingly, no one had actually just written to them and said, do you want to write a Kafkaesque short stories? One of my favourite examples of that was when I approached Elif Batuman, author of The Idiot, various other books. I did it through her agent because I don't know her personally. So I suggested the idea to her agent, and he was being very official and agent-like and negotiating me very, very hard on terms and money and delivery and so on. And then eventually, some weeks later, when we had bashed out this contract and everything, and everything was settled, and I said, so is she going to do it? And then he emailed me back an hour later and said, yeah, she wrote it as soon as I suggested it, because she wrote it overnight, because she had been in the process of trying to find a new flat in New York, and the experience had been, in her mind, so Kafkaesque that as soon as this idea was suggested to her, she immediately wrote it. Obviously, he'd kept that hidden from me because it's not great for his negotiating. So yeah, it's just been so wonderful writing to different people and seeing how much they've enjoyed it. But then I think there's been an interesting other side to that sense in which Kafka seems to speak so much to so many people, and to that sense in which the word Kafkaesque is applied so widely. And I experienced this when a review of the book came in The Observer, and I quite enjoyed what it said, which was the reviewer described the book. It said, there is something inescapably gimmicky and opportunistic about books of this sort. And then he went on to say, it's hard not to see it as a set of extended riffs on experiences someone might describe as like totally Kafkaesque, which I couldn't help but laugh at. I mean, but I think that speaks to the fact that, yes, the word has become very universal, and because Kafka is so important to so many people, that means that people, in a sense, feel some sense of ownership over what he means to them, and this in some way impinged on what this reviewer, I haven't bothered to remember his name, but what this reviewer felt the word meant. But yeah, overall, so much fun to be had.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, Arthur, your turn.
So yes, I've had two encounters with Kafka. So the first was the Metamorphosis, and then later A Hunger Artist. And there is definitely a connection between the two. But I think I was just thinking of what attracted me to Kafka. And it was at a time when I was really starting to make work, and I was hanging around at the opera house. I was choreographing operas, and Edward Watson would always walk through the canteen, and quite an extraordinary looking human being. And I read an interview that he had just done, where he had said that he felt very unlike a ballet prince, and that he felt too freaky in a way to be this kind of balletic a prince who would do Swan Lake or Cinderella or something. And I thought that was really interesting. And at that time at the Royal Opera House, they were starting to do projects in the Limbury Studios, which was like way down, sort of in the bowels of the theatre, which was it felt like an exciting place. And I don't really know how the Metamorphosis came. I think sometimes these things just kind of drop from somewhere. Because I just remember a friend telling me about it at school, in high school, but I never really looked into it. I didn't really have a household that was full of books or culture in that sense. It was always something that I always had to sort of find or stumble across. But somehow I'd remembered the Metamorphosis, the story of it, and then it was my partner was celebrating his 50th, so in Jamaica. So I bought a copy, and I took that with me on this holiday. And what happens in Jamaica at about sort of 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, the insects wake up and start making this incredibly loud noise, like car alarms or something really, really, really loud and really alien. And it all felt very like a real big sign and something very visceral. And as I was reading it and hearing this like chorus of, it sounded like a million insects screaming, I really started to see how this could possibly work as a production done without words. And the absurdity sort of helped. It provided a narrative where you could find the side roads to find a place for it to speak poetically and for it to move. And it was, in a way, it was all there, and it suddenly felt very, very clear. And it felt like Kafka was almost saying what to do within it, because the moves were so particular about what Gregor was going through. So long story short, I got back to London and had a coffee with Ed Watson, and he was into the idea. And then we very quickly, I think like 10 months later, we're doing the premiere of the production. And it was a wonderful experience, just diving into the work and into the literature, which was in a way, an interesting investigation, because there wasn't really anyone in the room telling us what was right or wrong. We were just discussing it, and we were going into and trying to find the process through dance and through sound and through theatre to try and describe this story. But I felt like at the same time I did feel sort of deeply connected to Kafka in a sort of weird way, but even maybe we all had that. I don't know. But I felt like I even had a slight crush on him, because there was just looking at his pictures and then looking at his back. I just wanted to kind of hang out with him and discuss, and so there was a little bit of a infatuation going on at the same time, and then we. Years later came to A Hunger Artist, which was a completely different experience, which felt like almost the sequel, maybe. But in this time, it was such a different process because we had the privilege of collaborating with what we call the Kafka gang. Is that what you guys called yourselves? Yeah. Where we had absolute and academic insight into the literature, which provided another whole way to delve into the creative process. So it's been both of my Kafka experiences have been extremely rich and rewarding in different and fascinating ways.
Oh, thank you so much, Arthur. Shall we have a quick look at your clip maybe now? Is that okay? Because we had, yeah. That's the beginning of A Hunger Artist in June. Yeah.
Nicht. Ein Hungerkünstler. A hunger artist. No? Someone who fasts or starves themselves for a competitive period of time for the amusement of a paying audience. Aren't you glad you came? Yeah. Yes. I just need a little bit of help. It's something that happens every now and then. Would you mind helping me, sweetheart? I need you to take the end. I'll get on this side. Yeah. Moment. Warte. Okay. This is a very rare delicacy. Something that very few of you will ever have seen before. Possibly the last of its kind, and something only connoisseurs really have a taste for. Ready? Pull. Go!
Too short. So, where do we start our conversation? There are cross connections. I have questions. Maybe it's hard. It's where to. Or maybe shall I start with just an impression and then maybe a more specific question? Because I was struck when I was actually in preparation of tonight, listening to some of your work. And especially, that's why I talked you into the beginning of The Man Who Disappeared with the Gershwin music. It's so dynamic, it's so rhythmic, it's a breath, or it's almost breathless, the way in which you transpose the beginning of that novel into sound and speech, into that sound, the sound dimension. And to me, it was dance-like. It was actually very, I don't know what you thought, Arthur. It's like a choreography. And then I was, oh, wow, actually I did not, that is just something where I felt, God, how interesting the connections are in that type of transposition that you do with the work that you do, but maybe even obviously also the work that you do, where you told me that your sculpture, you started in stop motion, and you tell your sculpture, you see your sculpture being narrative in some way. In that sense, also dynamic and not static. And then we may want to go back to the writing, and then this person who sits down and writes it in one night, even before even being officially commissioned. So maybe, I don't know, this was just the impression that I had thinking about what we, about what we get in your work. I don't know whether you wanted to say anything about that, or how you came, maybe to start, how you came up with that, the score for the beginning of The Man Who Disappeared, the script, the pacing.
I knew that I wanted the trial to be very different from
Exactly.
The Man Who Disappeared.
And it is.
And I wanted them to have a different color palette and to feel that although you can sense, that it is clearly an adaptation of Kafka, and has my flavors mixed in with it, that they're very different ends of the spectrum. And so, I mean, I wanted them both to be funny, and I wanted them both to play with pace and rhythm. I think there's always been a lot of rhythm in my work, and I think that I think if you're interested in comedy, or especially sort of comedy that's not funny, you're interested, you know, if the tension that sort of the dark comedy and black comedy can create, the humor of the absurd, the grotesque, the things that make you feel uncomfortable. It's, for me, I wouldn't know where to start if I wasn't fascinated already by rhythm and play in that sense. And so partly what I had to do reading America, The Man Who Disappeared, was work. Well, I realized fairly early on that you need, it's almost a cartoon in literature form, a bit like sort of Catch-22 is. It's a cartoon in novel form, and I needed a narrator who could be elastic, who could be stretchy, and there's parts in it where, I don't know why I'm holding this, sorry, and there's parts of it where she gets involved in the story itself, and, you know, Carl has passed out, and it's the narrator trying to wake him up so that he gets out, and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. So I think that there's always been something about rhythm and play, and and I think with The Man Who Disappeared, the way that you start to create the scenes are almost like you get dropped into a scene for a little moment. And this is the beautiful thing about not having no physical walls and no physical setup, is that the music and the narrator's voice can carry you, deposit you in a moment, and then pick you up again and take you away. And the trial's written very differently, where there are doors and people enter and exit and that kind of thing, and therefore everything happens in quite contained ways. But yeah, the narration and the score work together in this.
Amazing, wonderful. So it's she narrator, right? It's she, the narrator is, yeah, exactly. No, when you just said, and then the narrator, you know, picks him up again, slaps him, wakes him up again. You know, I, of course, immediately think about Miao Miao's impresario, who is now a she impresario too, in your adaptation of Hunger Artist. I mean, I don't know whether you, or maybe you wanted to say something else, but I don't know whether you wanted to pick up, because it's so interesting, because it was a real decision, isn't it, to go down that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I was trying to find was a sexual charge, and and the project came about because Ed and Miao Miao really wanted to do a project together. And for years, I was trying to find something, and it's very difficult because she is so sexually charged, and anything that happens around her can be. And the way in her normal act, where she brings people from the audience, and 90% of the time it'll be men who kind of work for her. So she's this kind of quite a bit of a sort of almost like a dominatrix, maybe in a way, is how maybe some people see it. But I thought it would be interesting to explore what this relationship was between the impresario and the hunger artist. And that's when, and the moment I thought of Miao doing that, at one point actually was suggested that maybe they swap, and I thought that wouldn't work. But the moment I imagined that, and because she is so sexually charged, and that there was a tension there, immediately it became much more interesting of what might happen between them. So there's often passages that we explored when she's inside the cage and the cage is closed, and there's this kind of almost dreamlike, and we started thinking of Faye and how Faye is in love with death, and how that the impresario could also be a death character, that maybe the hunger artist, because the hunger artist in a way is also in love with death himself. And so there just a lot of layers started to occur, which kind of allowed for the songs and allowed for their relationship to develop. So I think it would be a completely different story if it was a man. Well, I mean, it would have been a different kind of relationship, would have been maybe a male relationship, but this seemed to work in that sense.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Can I pick up, it was the word playful, to play came up. Maybe Tessa, I don't know. I'm just going back to our conversation over dinner. I'm sorry to, but it was so wonderful when you said, "Oh, because then my question, of course, always when we see this amazing work, where does it come from? You know, and you tell me about metamorphosis. Oh, the insects in Jamaica, and then it descends, kind of. Where does it come from? And you said, I just play. I mean, maybe do you want to say a little bit? Go back to that a little bit. What you meant by it, or how that works for you?
Yeah, I think I was struggling to explain my work and kind of thinking of it in terms of childlike play and creating worlds and that kind of obsession and control. And I think I'm still doing that as an artist, kind of, but kind of I was always obsessed with my miniature things, never insects as a child. I was quite scared and squeamish. But then at university, overcame that quite quickly through the study of human anatomy. Here at the Ruskin, in the first year, you have to draw like a dead body. It's lovely. It's kind of like half skinned and has like 1.5 legs and 1.5 arms, so you can see inside. It's fascinating. It's grotesque, and fascinating, and kind of engulfs you a bit like the insects in Jamaica. And I became obsessed with the human form, the skeletal form, but going back to the idea of movement and animation, started making skeletons from natural materials, but always wanted them to be alive, to animate them, and that kind of, I think Kafka comes in there with. I was told to read The Metamorphosis, and then that kind of stayed with me, but I didn't really get into Kafka. But it led me to the animations of Jan Svankmajer, Ladisla Starovich, and kind of that sort of obsession with movement and animation and world creating and play. And it got a bit out of hand, to be honest. Still doing it.
Yeah. No, thank you. I don't know, Anna, I don't know how that was for you when you were working with writers. Some of them, they will not have produced texts in 12 hours. Did you have a process, being in touch with them, talking about their work, this is the German, betreuen, giving the, sort of, how was that? Talking through that writing process with some of them, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. So it varied a lot across the writers, and some of them were very self-contained in their artistic process. I mean, someone like Ali Smith, who I knew how she worked a little bit from a previous job with her publisher, and she writes what she writes, and her editor will perhaps change a comma, but it is very much what she writes is essentially the book that is published. Some of the other writers I had a little bit more input on. I mean, Leonie Ross's story was interesting because I went to Leonie with a suggestion of my own, which was that at this point in the collection, I had quite a few of the stories already, and it seemed to me that not many of them were dealing with what you might call overtly political situations. They were all quite a lot about the individual and about housing. And it suddenly struck me, it's insane that I published this book without a story about the Windrush scandal in the UK, because it's just, just this horrific kind of bureaucratic nightmare for the people who are involved. And wondered if Leonie might want to write that story, and spoke to her about it. And she was really interested in the idea, and she really wanted to write a story for the book. But then she went away and thought about that and felt that actually that wasn't the story that she wanted to write. And she instead wrote this very haunting, quite scary story about a black woman caught up in essentially in the health system, and about medical misogyny and racism, which is really brilliant and one of the best in the book. But yeah, sort of changed from, and actually also in the course of the writing, that one, in the first draft that she sent me, the first half was absolutely brilliant, and then the second half went in a direction that didn't yet feel quite true to what I think the story wanted to be. In a way, I think it was a case where she had this idea for the story, but wasn't quite letting herself write how dark the idea was. And I don't know if that was something about letting herself have the permission to write a story, which was actually quite angry and quite bleak. And then I read it and said, no, it has to be what it really is. Not. It felt like she was tempering herself a bit. So yes, that was, so that there was a bit of back and forth with some of the writers. Some of them also are just, wrote the story, and I suggested the odd word here and there.
Fascinating, yes, thank you. I was just wondering, I mean, it's so rich, there's so much, but of course, I don't know, you might have questions, something burning that you would like to come in with at this point. We have microphones here, or not, we go on, but I just want to, yeah, of course, yeah. And
were any of the writers in the collection interested in what your definition of Kafkaesque was? Or did they all go, oh yeah, I know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No one questioned it.
It's mine. It's mine.
Everyone was very happy to interpret it however they wanted to.
Good.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Sue Jones, maybe a microphone for Sue? And then
Perception. And about, it's for anybody. If you want to say something about who you envisage reading or hearing or whatever, or looking for your various interpretations of Kafka. And it came to me because I was thinking of Arta's interpretation of The Hunger Artist, which I saw twice at the Oxford fire station. And the first time I was in the audience, and of course it is highly meta-theatrical in that the audience is almost choreographed in an improvisatory way, in that it is part of the story. And then I saw it the next night from above, and I thought, oh my God, I'm in the place of the narrator here. So I'm just wondering if any of you, and it might go for exhibitions, it might go for, certainly for radio play, and for your collection too. I'm just wondering if you have anything specific to say about who you envisage and as the receiver, and how they will receive this.
Yes. He said without using the mic. Yes, I can. I love that as a question because I don't know how to answer it. It's always baffled me who I write for. If I used to be writing something that, I used to say I'm writing for the version of me that hadn't had this idea. And that got me so far. And then after a while in a career as a writer, you've got to be at least have a cursory interest in what audiences might make of your work as well, rather than just an imagined version of you. And so I try and find a balance between writing for absolutely nobody but myself, and then reminding myself of an audience that might not have the starting point that I came from to this particular story, to Kafka, to whatever. And so sometimes I do something for them, something signposting to help them through the story. And then I do something for me, which is to hide something or be a bit obscure or nuanced. But yeah, it's a game that I've learned to play between me and an imagined audience over the 20 years or so that I've been writing. And with Kafka in particular, I really thought that I was going to be scared of the academics. I was scared of the academics because they know and they care and they've got the right words and they've got and I'm dyslexic and I didn't do university and it's all too much and scary. And then, you remind yourself that the original is already there and it's untouchable and it's perfect. And all that's happened is you get to play with some ideas in it and hope that lets some more people in. And if people feel that it's closed some of the doors that they thought were important to remain open, that's all right because the original's still there and another adaptation's going to be along in just another 50 or 25 years from now anyway. Yeah, so I try to answer that, but I haven't quite answered it for myself yet.
Does anyone want to add something?
Yeah.
We have 2 more questions.
Yes,
but
I'll just talk about it was interesting about audience, and I think for both, I wanted the audience were very important for both the Metamorphosis and Hunger Artists. In the Metamorphosis, we did it originally, which is the way it really should be done always, is in the traverse, so the audience sit on both sides of the set. So in a way they can see each other. And in a way it becomes, so the family, the way the whole narrative plays out in front of the audience, they are sort of under the looking glass, so that the audience are observing, but also they are sharing with each other because they can see each other watching the horrors that are happening in front. And you'd either see people cuddling or reacting in various ways, which was a lovely shared experience. With the Hunger Artist, it was important that the audience became the audience within the story, so they played the role of the audience of the exhibition of the Hunger Artist, and it was to stand around the cage, and then the cage would move. But also, because it was an hour and a little bit of a show, there was I wanted the audience to also be part of the endurance that the Hunger Artist was going through of having his 40 days without eating, but also there was an endurance of the audience to kind of go through that with him. And I remember watching the first preview and standing and being completely exhausted in my legs and thinking this is going to be really tough for the audience. And I think it was, but I was like, you got to stand it through. That's part of the endurance. But by the time you get to the end, you will feel that there is sort of there should be a little bit of a payoff. So it is interesting how I think Kafka does demand that from an audience. And I mean, and it's interesting when you do have, I think when you have an audience, you have them captive. It's very different to reading, because when you're reading, you're going into your head and you're seeing it like a film, or you're imagining it exactly how you want to, and you can go anywhere, and there can be millions of different interpretations. But when you've adapted something and you're realizing it, it's a very different, it's a very, very different experience to literature. Yeah.
I guess I had an insight. So normally I works in galleries, and people go to art galleries to look at the art, and it's obvious that it's art. And I love making art in non-art galleries. It's more interesting, to be honest. And especially this piece, which is kind of it's big and it's busy, but it's also quite subtle. And over the summer, I came to Oxford a few days to take photos. Didn't get here quite early enough to avoid opening. I was there for hours, and I got this insight into people looking around the exhibition. And some people just do not look, and it's so interesting. They just kind of skim things, and it's like, oh, there's an insect. Oh. But I'm totally aware that my work is quite complex and it's quite demanding, and the audience has to put the effort in to kind of to experience it, immerse themselves in that world. And I think when I was younger, and if I was in galleries, maybe untangling pieces and somebody was there looking at it, and they were sort of interpreting, and then I'd be like, oh, no, that's not what's happening, this is what's happening. Because it's kind of like, sort of control freakishness, having control over their world and wanting to explain it, let that go a bit. Let the audience, the viewers, have their own interpretation. So when I was taking photos in the podium, I just literally did not make eye contact with anyone because I didn't want to speak to anyone. I didn't want to explain anything. But some people really did get involved, and they did get kind of down on their hands and knees and really look. And it was lovely to witness, and then to hear them going around the rest of the exhibition as well. It's interesting.
Nice, yes. We have two more, Sophia and then Siamala. Let's, take your... And then another one, of course, and I think then...
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really intriguing to hear how this exploration between what is Kafka, what are different themes, and how do they translate or also provoke different features of media in which you're working or art forms. So Ed, when you were mentioning or asking, did anyone want to have a definition of a Kafkaesque before jumping into the work and therefore assuming there's some sort of idea or preconception that one has? I was wondering how it was, how your own experiences were in terms of what idea you maybe had of what Kafka or the Kafkaesque would be for you, and whether the process of working through a piece, whether it's a radio show, whether it's bringing together the book, whether it's making, setting up an exhibition, or whether it's kind of producing the choreography and staging it, whether after having done that, has it reinforced your idea of what you thought Kafka or the Kafkaesque was, or did it change it?
Well, it's interesting because I did have two kind of intimate experiences with it. So, and I think so. I felt like I understood a lot more after going through the metamorphosis. But then approaching Hunger Artist, when we first started talking, I felt like I knew nothing. And I felt like everything I'd learned had sort of didn't make sense. But that was only because Hunger Artist is so different within itself to the metamorphosis. Because in terms of trying to realize it and trying to bring it to life. So in a way, and I think what I learned from our academics and Carolyn especially is that with Kafka it's always both. And I think that's even in that question, that's exactly what it is. It is and it isn't. Because you feel like you know nothing when you're going into it, and you think, how the hell are we going to do this? It almost felt, even with the Hunger Artist, I thought, God, it's so short and sort of simple, and and then the moment you start going in there, and then you get deeper and deeper and deeper, then it's about everything. I think that's the absurdity is there within itself already, that your own experience of it, of whatever the experience after going deep in there, I guess having some kind of crazy affair or something, and then coming out of it, you don't quite realize what you've gone through, but that is because each within itself is always different. Does that make sense? I don't think it makes sense, but you know what I mean.
Really fascinating to hear about all your different interpretations of Kafka. You've kind of touched upon what I want to ask already slightly, but I'll maybe just ask again in case it strikes a chord. And really I was interested to know if you felt any resistance when you were working with this, because of course Kafka, the great author, his text so difficult to understand. If you felt kind of, were there points where you thought, oh God, I don't know how to do this, and what happened for you or the artists that you worked with on your projects?
I mean, I think Kafka resists, and and he's anti-drama. There's these things that you learn, and they're in every story, every anecdote, every joke that's ever been told in the world, and in every scene of anything that you've ever seen in your life, there is an event. Something happens to change the situation. Something happens, something changes. That's the event. And it changes the understanding for the character, or the state of play, or there's a paradigm shift, or there's an evolution of the plot, or the stakes go up, the character gets more invested, the way out of the situation gets blocked, etc., etc., etc. And Kafka resists that, and you end up having you could end up having a fight with him if you didn't choose to have a play fight instead. Because whenever it looks like there's going to be an event in a Kafka chapter, that this moment is building towards this thing, and we'll find this out, or we'll get more light that's shed on this, etc., etc., the thing that you thought was going to emit light is suddenly omitted, or there's a distraction and it's from over there, and you go, oh, right, okay, I'll follow the distraction because that's yet more information and that will shed more light. And it seems to shed more darkness, and yet it didn't not shed light. And so as a dramatist, you have to typically write an event that has a singular function in a plot, that you can say to a director and to an actor, this is how I interpret this moment. It's about this one singular thing. And you try and keep it very singular. It's unnamed in the script, but in conversation, you try and keep it singular because you know that audiences will already bring a multitude of interpretations to any moment. Somebody getting keys out of a handbag, people can read sadness, woe, joy, whatever. That's already happening. And so you have to kind of play with the idea that this moment, this event that dramatically you're used to plotting everything by, is important, and it has a meaning. And whereas things like, in the magistrate's court, in the trial, and there's you'd think it's going to be a battle of wills and intellect and things like that, and then there's this huge commotion from the back of the room, and you follow that. You end up having to find other ways of playing those games that celebrate the medium that you're working in. So in radio, it's something that's aural, and if it's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you have at your disposal through the medium? And to answer your question as well, I felt like by the end of working for over a year, which was a joy and a fucking headache, with Kafka, I got to know his work, the detail, so much better, and yet I didn't learn any more about it. I'd gone from sort of gist of kind of, yes, I know what's happening in that plot, I know what happens in that plot, into the minutiae of how he plots out those chapters, but I don't understand it any better. I just understand how, not why or what or anything like that. I think that's a useful place to stop, probably.
Shall we have the final question over here? Yeah?
Thank you. I don't want to have to ask the final question, but if it is. I would like to hear from you what, from your perspective, is the relationship between the author, Kafka, and his work. Even the title of this podium discussion is Transforming Kafka. You're not transforming Kafka, you're transforming Kafka's texts, pieces. But even the conference title is Kafka Transformed. So what is the relationship? And I think Kafka is a very unique example where we always talk about the text, but we name the author. And it's not very often the case that it's so much linked to each other. Can you say something about that?
I feel like, Kafka said, I am literature. He wrote to Felice Bauer and said, I'm not into literature, I am literature. So in playing with his work, we are playing with what he's left, not just as his work, but as a description of him. That's all I'll say.
Actually, we have the final question now. Elizabeth Bow, please.
The question of animation and then loss, and ultimately the binary opposition between being alive or dead. And a lot of the stories do seem to move back and forth across this through either animating or, and I was thinking particularly of the image of the Hungerkünstler with that very sexy woman, which to me gave me a shock, you know, because I thought that's not the Kafka I know for that story. But I then thought it is very interesting. And I just wanted to mention something that I saw recently, the film Poor Things, which where you had the animation of almost a machine-like creature into an incredibly sexually overactive woman. I don't know if people have seen this film. Well, I'll just shut up then, because there's no point if you don't know the film. But it was just to say that looks back really to A.T.A. Hoffmann and the notion of the machine girl who turns into, you know, is supposed to be a woman, but who's actually a machine. And I think Kafka was interested in A.T.A. Hoffmann. But the image of the hunger artist being angular, you know, and without desire against this body of the woman. And anyway, I just got interested in that because, and then with the insects, you have a little machine like Odradek, you know, Kafka turns that into something, animates something which is not really biologically living. And then how that affects us, this uncertainties between what is it being alive or being dead, or becoming alive, being animated, or losing it. It's this movement back and forth between. So anyway, a rather garbled.
I think that was no. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was, shall we say, a comment more than a question, and also just. Time-wise, I mean, we could go on and on, testifies to the amazing richness of your work. Thank you so much for being so generous and sharing with us tonight your work. And I think we just now need a huge applause and a drink. Thank you so much.